Morning, everybody. It is time for a massive MLB strategy show. Tuesday morning, I'm joined with Matt LaMarca. We've got 12 games to talk games, but DraftKings and FanDuel, they have started the slate at 7 o'clock as opposed to 6:35 Eastern time, which sometimes happens. They move around the start time, which could have meant that we had more games to talk about, but 12 is just more than enough. Matt, how are you liking today's slate?
It's a good one. We've got a lot of pitching options to consider. I think there's some good ones. There's some that are going to be really chalky. So definitely some good leverage opportunities there. Should be a fun slate, I think.
Yeah, and let's just get right into talking about it because once again, 12 games. I don't want to be sitting here for 4 hours. I know Tyler's got important stuff to do, like, well, nothing, but but still, he can't be sitting around with us all day. So we're going to get right into this baseball slate, start breaking down some of the games, and shout out to Prize Picks who's sponsoring the show. As you guys come in, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. It is much appreciated. But starting with the first game on the slate, the Los Angeles Dodgers against the Washington Nationals. Now, like you said, there's a lot of good pitchers to choose from. There's a lot of good offenses. One of the pitchers we at least have to consider is Walker Buehler, who was in the Cy Young mix last year, ended up finishing third in the voting. He's been a little bit underwhelming so far this year. It's a positive matchup against the Washington Nationals, but as far as Walker Buehler goes, 20.1% K rate. That's down quite a bit from what we've typically seen from him. 3.47 expected ERA, although I will add that historically he has always outperformed his peripheral stats. Part of that is because Los Angeles does play as a pitcher-friendly park. He is on the road today. But what do you make of Walker Buehler when he has a good matchup? He's a little bit cheaper than we're used to seeing, but also the results haven't quite been there yet.
Yeah, I'm not a Walker Buehler guy in general. I think I've said on this show previously that he's the most overrated pitcher in baseball. He just does not have the strikeout upside that I'm looking for in an ace starting pitcher. That being said, it is a great matchup. So if he's going to fly a bit under the radar today, which I think is incredibly possible, then I think I will have to have some exposure to Buehler. He's also down to 9,200. So he's not, as high as we've seen from him in the past. I mean, he's been as high as 11-2 this season. So I think with the price tag, the matchup, if his ownership is hovering in that, 10%-ish type range, he's somebody to consider today for sure.
Yeah, and I'm just kind of diving into his numbers to see, what could potentially be a little bit different to cause the reduction in strikeouts this year. The velocity is still good. It was 95.5 last year. It's 95.4 this year. Like I said, the 3.47 expected ERA isn't massively concerning just because he's always been a guy that outperformed his peripheral stats. For his career is a 2.9 ERA, a 3.2 FIP, a 3.47 xFIP. Last year, he had a 2.47 ERA, 3.08 expected ERA, 3.16 FIP. Let's see. Where's he at with his swinging strike rate? Is there anything that looks concerning there? Because once again, the velocity looks good. Actually, get this, Matt. Swinging strike rate, career best, 12.7%.
Okay.
I think these strikeout numbers are coming up. I think we're looking at a little bit of a small sample size fluke for Walker Buehler. I know that strikeout rate is typically really quick to normalize, but when you consider strikeouts are at a career low, but his swinging strike rate is at a career high and the velocity hasn't dipped, that doesn't really jive with me. The strikeout should be there based on this information. So I'm going to like Walker Buehler on DraftKings at 9,200, 9,800 on FanDuel. It's not an issue of a price point, but DK, where we have to roster two pitchers, only 9,200. I find that to be a lot more favorable. I know you said that you yourself, not the biggest Walker Buehler guy, and I'm kind of on the same page as you. Like, I didn't think he was legitimate Cy Young candidate last year, even though he finished top 3 in the voting. But considering that the swing strike rate is actually at a career high, does this change any of your outlook on him, at least for today?
Yeah, not really, just because Washington has been a tough team to strike out this season. Despite the fact that they're kind of just league average against right-handed pitching, they have the 25th lowest, well, I guess 6th lowest, 25th highest. You know how that works. Strikeout rate against right-handed pitching. So they've actually been a kind of a tougher matchup from an upside perspective, just because they don't whiff all that much. So I think that kind of fits with how I view Buehler. Like, I think his biggest fantasy value in this matchup is going to come from run prevention.
And fair to assume that just based on the size of the slate, if you aren't the biggest Walker Buehler guy, no real interest in stacking the Nationals.
Correct.
Yeah, and then starting for Washington, Josiah Gray is going to be on the mound. Now, Josiah Gray, he was the prize piece that Washington got in return for Max Scherzer and Trey Turner. It's a fairly shitty return, but Josiah Gray still.
Hey, Kyber Ruiz too, not bad.
Yeah, I'd rather have Trey Turner and Max Scherzer, just for me. Trey Turner in particular.
I think that's fair.
I also think it's weird how some of these trades are viewed, where people are like, oh, the Nationals are struggling, they should trade Juan Soto. Why? Soto's one of like what pieces are they going to get that are better to build around than Juan Soto?
I just think they're not going to pay Juan Soto, so you don't lose him for nothing if you're not going to pay him. But that's really the only reason you would ever trade him.
Yeah, I mean, if not, you're just getting other players that you're not going to pay in the future, right, I guess.
But that's down the line.
Yeah. But I mean, just keep Juan Soto. That's your building block. He's arguably the best hitter in baseball, not just the best young hitter in baseball, because he's very young, but potentially the best hitter, period. He was the favorite to win the NL.
If you're not going to pay a guy like Juan Soto, what's the point of owning a baseball team?
Yeah, fold the franchise. If you're not paying Juan Soto, you're paying nobody. I mean, they've got Steven Strasburg still, who's owed a massive amount of money, and they're stuck on that contract. But that aside, they've got Josiah Gray, who was a key piece that they got in return for Trey Turner and Max Scherzer. Josiah Gray has strikeout upside for sure. He has really good stuff, 25.3% K rate, but the run prevention isn't quite there yet at this point in his career. And this is such a difficult matchup against the Los Angeles Dodgers. We know how potent their offense is. Yesterday, they were one of the more popular offenses against Jonah Don, and they were still worth getting to at the end of the day. They ended up scoring double-digit runs. They piled them up pretty quickly. I think this is a good enough spot to stack up the Dodgers once again against Josiah Gray. There's really not ever a spot where it's bad to pick the Los Angeles Dodgers. It's a 12-game slate that's going to suppress ownership to some point. There's going to be a lot of pitchers to choose from, so it'll be hard to find a couple of cheap guys we roster. Are the Dodgers a high priority stack for you?
I'm going to say no, just because I do like Josiah Gray. I will not play Josiah Gray today because 8,500 against the Dodgers is a ridiculous number, but they're so expensive. You know, like every hitter on their roster is basically 5K plus on DraftKings. And given that there are some quality pitchers that I want to pay up for today, it's just going to be tough for me to fit a Dodger stack, especially against a pitcher that I do like to an extent. So the Dodgers will be a team, especially if they're popular, that I'm going to be underweight on.
All right, so let's move on to the next game. New York Yankees against the Baltimore Orioles. Does Jordan Montgomery only pitch against the Orioles? And maybe
I feel like the Yankees play 85 games a year against the Orioles.
It does seem that way, but for whatever reason, every single time Jordan Montgomery pitches, it seems like I've broken down a lot of matchups, him against the Baltimore Orioles, and it seems like this guy only gets positive matchups. Over the course of his entire career, he only pitches against shitty offenses. Let me pull up his game log here. So Jordan Montgomery, yeah, this will be his third start of the season against the Orioles. No, my mistake. This is his fourth start of the season against the Orioles. So yeah, he his first start came against the Orioles. So he's going to have 4 starts against the Orioles, 1 against the Tigers, 2 against the Rangers. Yeah, this dude only gets positive matchups. The results haven't quite been there for Jordan Montgomery, but I do think there are some underlying numbers kind of similar to what we could talk about when it comes with Walker Buehler, where once again, the numbers not terrible for Jordan Montgomery. It's just the strikeouts that are down. 3.35 ERA, 3.77 expected ERA. If you look at the strikeout rate, 19.3%, much different than what we saw out of Montgomery the last few years. 2021, 24.5%, the year before that, 24.4%, the year before that, 26.3%. So then once again, I start to look at some of the swing strike miss numbers and say like, okay, is there something amiss here that will lead to a reduction in strikeouts? Or is this just something where we're looking at, kind of a small sample size? And last I looked at his swinging strike rate, it actually was kind of like Walker Buehler at a career high, and it still is 13.9%. So we've seen a steady increase over the last few years for Jordan Montgomery's swinging strike rate. 2019, it was 12.2%. The subsequent seasons, 12.9%, 13.7%. This year, 13.9%. This is a good matchup for him against the Orioles. The strikeouts being down, kind of similar to what I thought about Walker Buehler. They shouldn't be down. If he's generating swing and misses, it's going to lead to strikeouts at some point. So as far as an SP2 option goes on DK, I like getting to Jordan Montgomery a lot here. Does that feel the same way with you?
Yeah, 100%. And the big difference between Montgomery and Buehler is Montgomery is facing a team that is very strikeout prone, right? The Orioles have the third highest strikeout rate against left-handed pitchers this year. They're also really below average in terms of WRC plus. So I think it's a great spot to go to Montgomery. We'll see what his ownership is looking like. But as long as he's not going to be super chalky, I think he's a very viable option.
Yeah, and by the way, not just on DraftKings, but FanDuel as well, single pitcher site, $7,100 for Jordan Montgomery. That is an extremely cheap price point. If you're looking to stack two popular offense or two expensive offenses, Montgomery makes a whole lot of sense on the single pitcher site as well, just because that salary is so cheap. So I think Montgomery has a whole bunch of utility on both DraftKings and FanDuel. I assume he's going to be somebody who I ultimately end up getting to a whole bunch of today, just because I think that price point is really good looking. No interest in stacking the Orioles for me against him. How do you feel when it comes to the Orioles offense?
Yeah, no need.
And then on the other side, Bruce Zimmerman is going to be on the mound for Baltimore. He got off to a decent start this year, but the numbers have really dipped as of late, which I think should have been expected. This is Bruce Zimmerman. And even though he had an expected ERA around the 3 mark a few starts into the season, the batted ball data never looked great for him. He was always giving up a lot of hard contact. So for today, 20% K rate, 4.63 expected ERA for Bruce Zimmerman. Here's the key, though. He's on the road against this New York Yankees offense that just has so many hitters that destroy left-handed pitching. So when you have to go up against the likes of Aaron Judge, Giancarlo Stanton, I'm not going to say anything that's going to be earth-shattering to anybody. You want some exposure to the Yankees offense today.
Yeah, and they continue to just make absolutely elite contact. They lead the league in every sort of StatCast metric that you want to look at. So, for me, Yankees are comparable to the Dodgers, right? They're both implied for 5 runs plus. They both have, a bunch of expensive hitters, but I'm always going to pick the Yankees over the Dodgers, especially when the Yankees are facing a left-hander.
Yeah, and then also you consider the Yankees are home. They play in a very hitter-friendly ballpark. And then here's something else you could use to differentiate. If we end up finding out, we don't have ownership projections quite yet this morning, but if the Yankees do end up being really popular, Anthony Rizzo hits left-handed pitching well. He hits right-hand pitching well, and he's been a very, very good hitter against handedness of both pitchers this year. He's been an easy way to differentiate when the Yankees go up against left-hand pitching, because what everybody does, not everybody, but in a broad sense, what the majority of the field is doing is you'll see some of these spots where it's like, oh, Aaron Judge, 20+% owned, Giancarlo Stanton, 20+% owned. And then you'll get Rizzo in the middle of the lineup who's like 5% just because they're facing a lefty. Well, a couple of things. Number one, I think Rizzo is more than capable of hitting Bruce Zimmerman. But then point two also is if the Yankees are going to hit Bruce Zimmerman hard, a right-hand pitcher is going to be in the game in like the 4th inning anyway. So, so that's a really easy way to differentiate some of these Yankee stacks against left-hand pitching. Just mix in some of the left-hand hitters like an Anthony Rizzo. If Florial ends up in the lineup again, he has been extremely cheap. He's not produced anything at the plate yet, but he is considered one of the better prospects in baseball. He's a good source of salary savings. So I think we're both on the same page here when it comes to the Yankees. Of the 2 offenses that we've talked about that we like so far, the Yankees are my favorites at this point.
Yeah, I'm with you.
All right, so let's hit on the next game. Atlanta Braves at home against the Philadelphia Phillies. This is one that I'm going to have a little bit less interest in. We've got 2 pitchers on the mound that I don't think are bad, but they generally don't deliver the most fantasy upside either. Max Fried, he's a 23.7% K rate this year, so that's not bad looking, but the matchup against the Phillies isn't necessarily ideal. He's a 3.64 expected ERA. Kyle Gibson, on the other hand, I rarely ever roster Kyle Gibson. He's a mediocre to above average pitcher, but just isn't very fantasy friendly because he generates ground balls, pitches to contact, a 20.8% K rate for Kyle Gibson, 3.47 expected ERA. I generally don't like to roster Gibson, like I said, but that doesn't mean I usually stack against him. The only times I really do stack against Kyle Gibson is on smaller slates where he's popular. Outside of that, I don't really like the offenses all that much in this spot, but I don't like the pitchers either. Do you see it any differently?
I think you might be underselling Max Fried a little bit. Calling him like not bad, I think is a little bit disrespectful. He's got a 2.74 FIP, 3.64 xERA. He's a good pitcher. Is he the best fantasy pitcher? No, right? He's got a sub 9 K per 9 this season that jives with most of his career strikeout numbers. So I'm not rushing to play Max Fried today, especially against the Philadelphia lineup that has a lot of good right-handed bats in it. But I do think that it was just a little bit of it's too harsh of a stance there from Max Fried.
Yeah, and I mean, once again, just to kind of clarify, I mean more from a fantasy standpoint. He's also never cheap, right? It's not like we're ever getting Max Fried at some kind of discount for his lack of strikeouts. He's $9,100 on DraftKings. On FanDuel, he is also $9,100. So it's a pretty steep price point. And then you look at his box scores this year. He's had a couple of solid outings, but for the most part, you're getting a guy who's putting up fantasy points in like the high teens or so. And this is a tough matchup. So, I mean, Max Fried, once again, if there's a time where he's 7,500 or in the 8,000 range, it would be different, but he always ends up being kind of this 9,100 range. And it's just generally hard for me to find upside for him there. And if you look at his salary this year, the cheapest he's been all year is 8,900. The most expensive he's been is 9,500. So he's always in the salary range. I really never end up getting to him, but I'm not stacking against him either. So this game is kind of just a pass for me because of the amount of options we have.
Yep. I think if I was forced to play a side, it would be the Braves offense, but I'm with you. This isn't a game that needs a ton of attention.
The next game we have to talk about, the Minnesota Twins at home against the Detroit Tigers. And let's start by talking about Sonny Gray, because he's a guy.
Sonny Gray day, baby.
It is. Is there, how many pitchers are harder to nail down than Sonny Gray?
It's a short list. Let me tell you, it's a short list.
I think the closest comp for Sonny Gray would be Joe Musgrove, because Joe Musgrove, another guy who's like, oh, cool, he's pitching against the Dodgers, 8 shutout innings with 15 strikeouts. And it's like, oh, he's at home against the Arizona Diamondbacks. He's not going to make it through 1 inning the next time out. Sonny Gray's kind of similar. This is a really good spot for him against the Detroit Tigers offense. Sonny Gray, we haven't seen him pitch a whole ton this year, but when he's been on the mound, he has been really solid. 28.7% K rate, 3.52 expected ERA. Like I said, matchup against the Minnesota Twins, which is going to be very favorable, and a totally broken price point on DraftKings.
Yeah,
how the DK pricing
algorithm, I don't know what kind of numbers go in that spit out Bo Brisky 7,400, Sonny Gray 6,800. Let's go. It's terrible.
It's ridiculous. And in the build I made this morning, Sonny Gray came out as my most rostered starting pitcher. I just don't really see a way around. And by the way, this is with the Corbin Burns slate. Everybody knows I love Corbin Burns. There's a picture right over there, over my shoulder on the ground that I haven't hung up yet of Corbin Burns. And generally, if there's a Corbin Burns slate, he's my most rostered pitcher. But for today, I just don't see how we avoid Sonny Gray at $6,800 against the Tigers. It is a miserable price point on DraftKings. FanDuel is $8,200. Even that is a little bit not enough for him, but it's a single pitcher site, so we could look to go elsewhere. But he's going to be a priority on FanDuel still. DraftKings, like I said, probably going to be my most rostered pitcher. Is there any pushback here? It's a wrong price in a favorable matchup.
It's hard. It's hard to get away from him. I mean, he's the largest favorite on the slate. He has the second lowest opponent implied team total, only trailing your boy Corbin Burns. And the strikeout upside is there with him, right? Like he's averaging over 10 strikeouts per 9 innings this season. So we haven't seen a ton of length from him, but he did go 6 innings in his last start against Oakland. I think that's a very reasonable expectation for him today. If he goes 6 innings, he's going to pay off this salary. So like cash game lock, absolutely. Tournaments, if his ownership approaches 40-50%, then maybe you can start pushing back a little bit, but it's hard to not have a bunch of Sonny Gray exposure.
By the way, if you refresh the tools, we just got updated ownership and all the tools have been run and everything. So Sonny Gray is currently projected to be the most popular pitcher on DraftKings by a very, very wide margin. He's projected for 43% ownership. I still am going to end up getting to him a whole bunch, though. Over on FanDuel, he's projected for 18% ownership. So he's the most popular pitcher on both sites, but I think it's warranted considering how well he's pitched when he's been on the mound this year, the strikeout upside, the matchup, the salary, everything seems to work out in his favor for him. And sometimes on these spots, I'll look to stack the offense against him just for leverage purposes. I don't even know if I could reasonably do it here, though.
Yeah, no, not with the Tigers. We do have another offense, though, the Twins, that are going to make, I'm assuming, our list of offenses that we like today.
Yep, and just another one right here where we have a team with an implied run total of 5+. They're going up against Bo Brisky. I believe Brisky was originally scheduled to start yesterday, and then they pushed him back to today, which for whatever reason, an extra day of rest is going to make all the world of the difference for Beau Brisky and his 13.2% K rate and 5.48 expected ERA. Most likely scenario, he gets his ass kicked here by Minnesota Twins offense that has been better than expected this year. We've got a healthy Byron Buxton, which has him at least as an MVP candidate for now until he gets hurt at some point. But as long as everybody's healthy for the Minnesota Twins, they recently got Carlos Correa back, which, by the way, that is the concern with the Twins going forward, is you got an offense built around guys like Byron Buxton, Carlos Correa. When you got players that are that injury prone, it could all come apart at any given moment. But for today, we do have the Minnesota Twins as the most popular offense on DraftKings. They're projected for 13.1% ownership. I don't have an issue with getting to the Twins. I think this is a great spot for them against Beau Brisky. But when you consider that they're the most popular offense on DraftKings, the second most popular offense on FanDuel, I think I prefer to get to teams like the Dodgers and the Yankees that we just talked about for lower ownership. The Dodgers have half the ownership of the Minnesota Twins today, 6.7% compared to 13.1%. The Yankees, 7% ownership compared to 13.1%. They're just a little bit too popular for me. Not that it's a bad spot. I think there's other high upside offense we've talked about that I like equally for less ownership.
Yeah, that's fair. The one guy that I feel like I'm going to have is Max Kepler at 3,400. Max is back, baby. There was a time when this guy was just so feared against right-handed pitching, and you look at his game log and he's back. So let's get Max in our lineups at 3,400. I think even if we are going to be underweight on the rest of the Twins.
I believe the only chalk hitter I can remember having a 3-homer game. I'm almost positive there was a day where Max Kepler, like 3 years ago, was 30% owned in contest and had a 3-homer game. It's like I just end me because when there's a chalk hitter that hits 3 homers, that's never going to be a slate I do well on. Once again, It was 3 years ago, but still resonates in the back of my mind. But yeah, he's cheap. He was somewhat popular yesterday. Hit a grand slam in the first inning. It looked like the Twins were going to score a gazillion runs, but they kind of stalled out after that. But they ended up winning the game. That aside, Max Kepler, I agree with you. I think he's a really good one-off bat for today. Next game we have to talk about on the slate, and I'm a little surprised this guy isn't picking up more ownership because I don't know people recognize how good Kevin Gausman has been to this point this year. We've got the Toronto Blue Jays on the road against the St. Louis Cardinals. Gausman, 28.9% K rate, 2.7 expected ERA. He leads all pitchers in wins above replacement by a pretty decent margin so far to open up the season, and he's had nothing but difficult matchups. I mean, a couple of easy ones in there, but for the most part, he's had tough matchups. And he's kind of rolled through everybody this year. Last start was a little bit of a hiccup for him. He only scored 8 fantasy points against the Mariners, but 22 plus in every other start so far this year. And the teams he's faced, the Yankees, the Red Sox twice, the Astros, on the road against the Rays. Once again, it's been a difficult strength of schedule, and he's kind of dominated everybody. I like what I've seen out of Kevin Gausman, considering the relatively low ownership on him. I think he's someone to be overweight to the field too in tournaments.
Agree. Kevin Gausman has been a stud this year. And this Cardinals offense is kind of overrated, in my opinion. I mean, you look at the runs per game metric, and they're up there right near the top of the league. They were third entering yesterday's slate, and I can't imagine that it's gone down. They won like 7-3, I believe. So they are putting runs on the board, but they are not hitting the ball well, right? Another team, they have the third lowest hard hit rate. They're in the bottom 10% of the league in average exit velocity. So they're kind of defying the StatCast numbers with some of their scoring metrics. So I think Gausman can certainly get there in this spot. The one thing that the Cardinals have done very well is they're putting the ball in play quite a bit. They have the third lowest strikeout rate against right-handed pitchers. So that does hurt Gausman's upside just a smidge. But I do think that, anytime you're talking a pitcher of this caliber, sub 10K, with relatively low ownership, you have to have some in tournaments.
10% ownership projected for Gausman on DraftKings, on FanDuel 6%. And once again, he's underpriced relative to what we've seen from him this year. And this Cardinals lineup, it's so right-hand dominant when their best hitters are guys like Paul Goldschmidt, Nolan Arenado. I feel much better with right-hand pitchers going up against them than left-handed pitchers. So I think this is a good spot for Gausman. He's getting overlooked by the field, in my opinion. And I mean, he's been really good this year, and he's rightfully in the Cy Young mix. Last I looked, he is second in terms of the betting odds. The only guy ahead of him is Justin Verlander. The ageless Justin Verlander has also been ridiculous this year, but Gausman, he's somebody who I definitely want to be overweight to the field on. Starting for the St. Louis Cardinals, Jordan Hicks, they're still acclimating him to a starting role, and it's been kind of underwhelming so far. The strikeout rate has been fine at 24.1%, but the results, 4.66 expected ERA. He still isn't working super deep into games. He's going up against the Toronto Blue Jays offense that has a lot of firepower in it. I know the Blue Jays have been a little bit disappointing after a slow start to the year, but I don't mind this as a bounce back spot for them, and they are projected for no ownership today. 1.4% projected ownership for the Blue Jays as a team over on DraftKings. On FanDuel, we're looking at the Blue Jays projected for 1.3% ownership. Given how good this offense is, they should just never be 1% owned, especially when they're going up against a mediocre pitcher in Jordan Hicks. So this is probably my favorite contrarian offense to look at today.
So I kind of like both sides here. I think you can play Jordan Hicks in like if you're looking for to load up on your bats. I think that, you probably have to limit your expectations. He's going to go 5 innings max. But he's cheap enough where if he goes 5 innings and he strikes out a batter per inning, that could potentially work at 5,800. So I don't hate Jordan Hicks if you need like a pure punt play at pitcher, but you lay out a nice case for the Blue Jays bats as well. I do think that we might have to start tempering our expectations with Toronto just a smidge. I mean, their offense has not been producing all that much, but again, all the underlying metrics are there, right? They're second in hard hit rate. They are third in average exit velocity. So they do continue to make good contact. They're just not putting runs on the board. So I agree. I think it's a good bounce back spot for the Blue Jays. But I will also have, maybe 5 to 10% of Jordan Hicks as well.
Yeah, I don't view that I'm going to get to Hicks. I just don't think it's necessary on a slate of this size, but I get the case for him. And who knows, maybe the Blue Jays offense, we just overrated them coming into the year. They do have a 93 WRC plus to this point, but I'll bet on the talent. I think they're going to get going sooner rather than later when, they've got guys like George Springer, Vlad Jr., Bo Bichette in the lineup. I know they've lost Marcus Semien from last year. Not that he's having a good year either, and he was really good last year, but ultimately by the time the season ends, I would be pretty surprised if the Blue Jays aren't one of the top 6 or 7 offenses by WRC plus in baseball. Let's hit on the next game here. The Boston Red Sox on the road against the Chicago White Sox. And we have another Cy Young candidate on the mound here for Chicago. Dylan Cease, 26.8% K rate, 2.23 expected ERA. He has had a couple of rough outings this year, but by and large, he's been really, really good on the mound. And another matchup here against the Boston Red Sox team that's been a little bit underwhelming at the plate. It certainly does help them that Trevor Story has gotten going as of late. He was really poor to start the year, but still, this is a team sub 100 WRC plus. Dylan Cease is really good. So I think Dylan Cease is another pitcher to get to, although he does fall behind me in terms of priorities because I would rather get to Zach Gallen. I'd rather get to Corbin Burns. I'd rather get to Kevin Gausman. So some interest in me with Dylan Cease, but not a super high priority pitcher.
I think I have a bit more interest in you. I really like the strikeout stuff with him. I mean, you look at his K rate. He struck out over 12 batters per 9 innings last year. He's up near 14 this season. So he always is going to have the potential to be the highest scoring pitcher on the slate just because of that immense strikeout upside. The Red Sox are not a team that we necessarily need to fear offensively. So I think this is a nice spot to target him. I don't think he's necessarily up there with like Corbin Burns for me, but I would probably have him as my number 2, like just in terms of raw projected points at starting pitcher today.
Yeah. And once again, I think the upside is certainly there. There's a lot of pitching options to choose from today, especially on the high end. And he's just going to fall behind for me, Zach Gallen, Kevin Gausman, Corbin Burns today. But we'll see what the ownership looks like later in the day. So like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, check out MLB Live before lock, and maybe something will change in terms of projected ownership that'll make some of these guys look different. But starting for the Boston Red Sox, Nick Pivetta, 23.6% K rate, 4.82 expected ERA, 1.15 FIP. He's also been somebody who's delivered a little bit of strikeout upside this year, but the 4.82 expected ERA, that's a little bit concerning. The White Sox, this is a team that also has what should be a talented offense on paper that just hasn't produced this year. The White Sox 92 WRC plus. They've been really inconsistent. Once again, kind of like the Toronto Blue Jays, I expect the White Sox to be better going forward, although I do have a little bit more confidence in Toronto turning it around than Chicago turning it around. But how do you view them against Pivetta?
It's funny you comp them to the Blue Jays because it's like they're almost the exact same team right now, right? The White Sox, I believe, are 28th in WRC plus against right-handed pitching. But again, if you look at the StatCast data, they're making excellent contact. They are third in hard hit rate. They're fourth or fifth in average exit velocity. So I agree with you. This is a team that's going to turn things around. I don't hate them as a stack today. Pavetta's pretty good, or he's not pretty good. He's okay. He's not one of the worst pitchers on this slate, but I do think that the White Sox can get to him.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page there in terms of when it comes with the White Sox. They're going to be in the mix for me, but also not a super high priority team. There's a lot of teams to choose from today. It's going to be hard to get to all of them. When it comes to 12-game baseball slates, I generally tend to be more spread out than I would like to be, but it's something that's hard to avoid on a lot of those slates, and that's going to be the case here. There's a lot of pitchers to like. There's a lot of offenses to like, kind of like you said at the top of the show. Moving on to the next game, the Houston Astros at home against the Cleveland Guardians, and right away, I think here's a spot that I could write off for myself. I rarely roster Framber Valdez in DFS, but I generally don't stack against him either. He's ends up being pretty expensive on the majority of slates, and he's a good pitcher, 3.23 expected ERA, but the strikeout rate, once again, sub 20%. I don't want to roster Framber Valdez. There's so many strikeout pitchers with high upside today, but I certainly don't want to be stacking against him either. So both sides I'm going to be writing off.
Yeah, for me, Valdez is probably going to come down to ownership. If he stays at around like 10%, I'll probably be in line with the rest of the field. He's been going deep into games, which is always a plus, right? 7 innings plus in his last 2 starts. He's gone at least 6 innings in 5 straight. So I do think that depth that he can pitch does help mitigate some of the lack of strikeout numbers. And he's a good pitcher and he has a great matchup. So he's somebody that intrigues me. It's going to come down to ownership for him.
Yeah, and as of right now with Framber Valdez, he is projected to be 15% owned on DraftKings, on FanDuel 3% owned, but he's 9,900 on FanDuel. Yeah. There's just no way for me to roster him at 9,900 on a single pitcher site. I mean, he's more expensive than Gausman, for instance. That's just absolutely absurd for me. And then over on DK, where he's 8,200, if he was crazy contrarian, okay, but 15% owned for Framber Valdez, I'll just look elsewhere. I'd rather play, once again, Kevin Gausman is less popular on DraftKings, a little bit more expensive, but that aside, I think Framber Valdez not quite going to make the cut for me. But on the other side, how are we going to handle the Houston Astros offense? Because they're going up against Zach Plesac, who he does not generate any swing and misses. 13.8% K rate, 5.69 expected ERA. Of all the pitchers on today's slate, Plesac is in the mix for being one of the worst to this point this year. And once again, he's going up against a very difficult offense in the Houston Astros. So I think Houston's a team that we are going to want to get to today. The question becomes, how much of them do we want to get to? They're projected for right around 8% ownership over on FanDuel as a stack, over on DraftKings. We're looking at the Houston Astros for 5.8%. Looks a little low to me. I want to be overweight to that number. How about yourself?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Houston just continues to rake. They're first in WRC plus against right-handed pitching. They're taking on a bad right-handed pitcher, and they're not going to be that chalky, right? Like neutral leverage on a offense like the Astros. Sign me up for that all day.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page there. It's Houston Astros. Once again, just not that much ownership. And as we kind of talk through this, and it always helps me to do these shows and talk through some of the early ownership numbers and our early thoughts on the players. And the more we talk about it, I think the less inclined I am to get to Minnesota and instead just play all these other offenses with similar implied run totals that are just half the ownership. So right now we have the Yankees, the Astros, and the Dodgers all with the same about projected team total, but half the ownership is Minnesota. And then you could also drop down and get to a team like the Toronto Blue Jays for 1% ownership. That I think makes for a good contrarian spot. So as we go through and point out more of these spots, I'm less inclined to get to Minnesota, more so to get to some of these other spots. Next game we have on the slate, Noah Syndergaard pitching at home against the Texas Rangers. He recently made a start against Texas, and did it go poorly for Noah Syndergaard. And, I know you remember the prime Syndergaard days as a Mets fan yourself. He's not that guy anymore. I still think he's a good pitcher, but the velocity isn't quite the same as it was pre-injury, and he's more reliant on pitching to contact. So I can't envision Syndergaard's going to be a guy rostered very much this year. He was actually really popular in that last start against the Rangers and just got absolutely smacked around. So his numbers right now, 17.1% K rate, 4.31 expected ERA. I don't want to roster Syndergaard. I'm not really looking to stack against him either. But if you get somebody like an Eli White who's leading off, that's a speed threat. These are the guys that make sense as one-offs against Noah Syndergaard. Because if you get a single against him, it's a stolen base almost for free. He does not hold runners well at all. So this is where I like to look at the Texas Rangers today. One-offs that are fairly cheap with a little bit of speed upside. What are you doing with Syndergaard and the Rangers?
Yeah, and the ownership numbers on the Rangers are kind of baffling right now because they're checking in with a 5.7% ownership share in the top stacks tool, which would make them pretty popular, but they're implied for less than 4 runs. I have to imagine that number dips. Like, if you wanted to tell me that the Rangers were going to be 1% owned today and you wanted to use them as a contrarian stack against Syndergaard, I would be all for that because you said you still think he's a capable pitcher. I do not, right? I mean, Syndergaard has always kind of quietly been a pitch to contact type of guy for a guy who throws 100. And now that he's throwing sub 95, the strikeout rate has just absolutely plummeted. So that to me is a fine pitcher to stack against, right? Lots of balls in play. And anytime that there are going to be a lot of balls in play, you never know what's going to happen. So I wish Texas was grading out as a bit more contrarian because I would like them in that spot. But unfortunately, that's not what we have, at least for the time being.
You know why they probably won't be that contrarian? And that's not to say that they're going to be, like one of the most popular offense, but the reason they're going to pick up ownership is because his last start was against the Texas Rangers. Right. He didn't make it out of the first inning. And there was so much fantasy upside there because there was home runs, there was stolen bases against Syndergaard. So I think a lot of people are going to look.
Been a problem for him too.
Yeah, I mean that's why I remember when I was doing the show. I'm pretty sure I was doing with Adam for Syndergaard's last start, and he had said, "Hey, if Eli White leads off or is in the lineup, that's somebody to target." And the game started. Eli White got a single, then stole second base on the next pitch. So if he's leading off again, which I would assume is fairly likely since he did last time with success, that's a really good one-off to me. If he gets on base, he's almost certainly going to steal second. And Syndergaard isn't even going to attempt to do anything about it. He might even let him steal third. That's just how Syndergaard pitches. He pays no mind to base runners.
He is Thor. I mean, Thor doesn't have to be concerned with peons on the bases.
No. By the way, did you see the new trailer for the Thor movie?
No, I have not.
Well, it looks pretty entertaining. That aside, we've got Could Be Travis is laying it down. Eli White is stealing a base tonight. I tend to agree with you. I think if you ask me to pick any one player to steal a base, and we rarely ever do this on baseball shows, I'd probably go with Eli White if he's in the lineup. I think it makes a whole lot of sense. Other side of the game here, we have Dane Dunning pitching for the Rangers. I like Dane Dunning. I think he's a solid pitcher. Here's the issue, though. He never goes deep into games. Whatever. This happened even when he was with the White Sox. They were super cautious with him. And Dane Dunning, 23.5% K rate, 4.22 expected ERA. Here's the issue, though. This Rangers offense is really good. They have a high implied run total. But of all the teams we've talked about with this like 5 implied run total range, the Angels are probably my least favorite just because I do think they're going a little bit overrated. Just from the standpoint of I think Dane Dunning is better than he gets credit for. The other pitcher we're going to talk about later that kind of falls in the same category, Zach Gallen, until recently, was never, ever looked at all that favorably by sportsbooks. That's finally started to change. But Dane Dunning, the Angels are expected for 13% ownership against him. That's a little bit much for me. I'll be looking elsewhere. But Dane Dunning, what do you make of him in the matchup against the Angels?
I like Dane Dunning in general, like you, but this matchup doesn't seem great for him. It's enough that I'm also off of the Angels today. I actually also like the Rangers plus 135 in the betting markets. But I don't see a ton of value in rostering him in DFS on this slate.
Yeah. So, and well, I wish we could play Dane Dunning more, but there's just too many starts. Like, oh, cool, Dane Dunning's going really well. And it's like, oh, they took him out in the fourth inning at 58 pitches for no reason at all. It's happened to me too many times in the past that I've just kind of stopped playing Dane Dunning. It's happened when he was on the Rangers. Like I said, it happened back when he was with the White Sox. Whatever team he goes to, they handle with kid gloves and just kind of makes him unappealing. If you guys want to play some Angels batters, they're going to be really popular. I get it. A lot of people are going to. I just
People love the
take
Angels, man. You know, that Mike Trout, Shohei Ohtani, that's a lot of sexiness right there. So that's why the Rangers are going to carry way more ownership than some of these other teams implied for 5 runs.
And Ohtani isn't even having that good of a year. He's a 125 WRC plus. Not that that's bad. Obviously, that's good. But these are far cry numbers from what he put up as the MVP last year. I'm actually a little confused how he's still the considerable betting favorite to win the American League MVP. He's worth 0.7 wins above replacement. His pitching's been good this year. It's been better than it was last year, and it's the best pitching season of his career. But I don't think that Ohtani warrants to be the MVP favorite right now when he's a 125 WRC plus.
No, I mean, Mike Trout is clearly better than him. So that to me should end the conversation right there.
Yeah, no, I actually, do you know who has the highest WRC plus on the Angels?
The Ward, right?
Taylor Ward not only is the highest WRC plus on the Angels, highest WRC plus in all of baseball. And I believe the last I looked, he leads both Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani in wins above replacement. Just an absurd start to the year for Taylor Ward. But either way, when it comes to Ohtani, I think it's reasonable to expect a little bit of a drop off from what he did last year. I don't think he's ever going to regularly be a guy with a 152 WRC plus. Obviously, a very good hitter. I'm just a little light on the idea that he should be the favorite to win the American League MVP right now. I don't know who. It's kind of hard to say who else it could be because Trout's had such a long injury history at this point that I can't really bet on him staying healthy. Same goes for Byron Buxton. Yeah, so it does make it a little bit tricky.
Well,
but it is something.
What about that 6'15" dude out in New York who's got 17 bombs already or something like that?
Yeah, if the season ends today, Judge would win MVP. Right?
Yeah, I think so.
Also, another injury risk when it comes to Aaron Judge. So it gets tricky trying to figure out really how to handicap the AL MVP. But whatever, that's neither here nor there. We're here to talk about today's baseball slate and, of course, Prize Picks, who's sponsoring the show. If you guys are signing up at Prize Picks for the first time, use the promo code Awesemo because you get up to $100 bonus on your first deposit. And really, this is the easiest way to make money in the DFS and sports betting industry. You take advantage of sign-up bonuses. You guys have seen some of the other stuff that we have in terms of sign-up bonuses at sportsbooks now that they're opening up, and even some of our partnerships with DFS sites. Don't leave free money on the table. So use this promo code Awesemo when you sign up at Prize Picks. Get up to $100 bonus on your first deposit. Next game on the slate to talk about it is the Arizona Diamondbacks at home against the Kansas City Royals. And I'm going to talk about my guy, Zach Gallen, here because he rules. He's a really good pitcher. And it is only recently that the teams that he pitches for are favorites when he's starting. 26% K rate, 2.02.
They're favorites today.
Yeah, well, I mean, today is an obvious one for him to be favored in. But, I mean, he pitched against, I think it was 2 starts ago, he pitched against the Marlins as an underdog. There's still been a lot of really favorable prices. And there's also been a lot of games where teams going up against them, they have a team total of like over under 4.5 runs. And it took a while for books to finally be like, okay, this Zach Gallen guy isn't that bad. Because there's been these starts where pretty consistently this year, I mean, the Dodgers and the Mets, I guess those are reasonable spots for him to be underdogs. But when he's pitching against the Marlins, I don't think that's a spot where he should be an underdog. And the numbers this year for Gallen are so strong that it's hard for me to not consider him a high priority option. And he rarely ends up being popular in DFS. And today is no different. He's projected for 7% ownership over on DraftKings. On FanDuel, he's projected for 1% ownership. He's really expensive there, $10,900. But what does Gallen have to do for people to actually want to play him in DFS?
Strike out a few more batters, I guess. But no, I'm with you. He is a really good pitcher, right? I mean, he's a clear regression candidate. He's not going to pitch to a sub 200 BABIP all year, but he can afford regression at a 1.14 ERA, right? He can lose a full earned run and still be one of the best pitchers in baseball. So I'm with you. He shouldn't be that contrarian in a matchup where he's a minus 200 favorite. I'm with you too, that you look at the Royals, right? His opponent implied team total is 3.6 runs. That seems high to me. So, right, when you talk about some of these other pitchers that are below 3.5, I don't see why Gallen should be that much higher. So I'm with you. Let's get some Zach Gallen tonight.
Yeah. And once again, I mean, we're getting really quality pitchers at some reduced ownership today, Zach Gallen being one of them. Earlier, we talked about Kevin Gausman, another guy who's putting up really good numbers this year and people aren't really getting to. So I think it makes sense. And on the other side of the game, we have a pretty shitty pitcher to talk about, Jonathan Heasley, who so far this year is a 4.32 ERA, 6.02 expected ERA. Now, I know some of you guys might be saying, well, he's only made 2 starts. It's a small sample size. All right. Well, last year he made 3 starts. He had a 4.91 ERA, a 7.21 expected ERA. And even then, like, all right, it was only 3 starts. Well, how about his minor league numbers this year? Well, he has made 6 minor league starts with a 4.44 ERA, a 3.85 FIP. I don't really understand how Heasley has worked himself a role in the Royals rotation. He's a non-ranked prospect. He doesn't have great minor. He doesn't have good minor league results. He doesn't have good major league results when he's been up here. Zips hasn't projected for a 5.04 ERA. I know the Diamondbacks don't have a good offense, but I think if we're looking for salary savings, the Diamondbacks are a cheap offense we could get to that'll let us pay up for some of the expensive pitchers on the slate, because this is another team. Implied run total over 5, easy matchup. I don't even care that the D-backs offense sucks because it's a good matchup. I don't think Heasley could get out major league hitters.
Yeah, he's the classic quadruple A pitcher, right? I mean, he's just there to be a warm body while the Royals are going through their rebuild process. So I'm with you. The only concern is that the Diamondbacks are not going to sneak up on anybody today. They have the 3rd highest projected ownership share, but that makes sense when you consider how cheap these bats are with a 5+ run implied team total. So I don't mind eating some chalk on the Diamondbacks if you're going to then get contrarian at pitcher. That's kind of how I would approach it.
A lot of debate in chat right now about who the worst team in baseball is, and none of you have brought up the Cincinnati Reds. The worst team in baseball is the Cincinnati Reds, who I had tweeted.
I think it's the Pirates. The Pirates have a worse run differential.
Do you know the 6th highest paid player on the Reds is this year?
It's Ken Griffey Jr. Yeah.
Yeah.
That kind of warms my heart as a Mets fan. Maybe they'll take it a little bit easier on us this year on Bobby Bonilla Day, but probably not.
Yeah, I didn't even realize that they were still paying Ken Griffey, but that's pretty. No, I had no idea at this point. Not only that, but Griffey was not great during his time with the Reds. I'll pull up his numbers really quick because we're making good time on the show. We've been hurrying through to try to get all these games, and we've only got a few left here. So Griffey, his time with Cincinnati, he was also there for a really long time. Do you remember how many years he spent with the Reds?
6, 7,
9.
9 years.
8.5 actually. 8.5 with the Reds, and he had one good year with them. His first year, he was worth 5.4 wins above replacements. That's a solid all-star. He did not have a single other year with the team where he produced more than 3 wins above replacement. And he had multiple years as a negative replacement level player. And that is to pay him for 20 years after he was with the team. Not great. Not great at all.
Not great.
Yeah, the final years he had with the Reds, -6 wins above replacement, -6 wins above replacement, -0.5 wins.
6 wins?
No, negative 0.6.
Okay.
I don't even know. -6 wouldn't be possible.
I don't know how that's possible. That's like getting 600 at bats and never getting on base.
Yeah, even what's the worst wins above replacement year in recent memory? That has to be a Chris Davis year, right?
It has to be a Chris Davis season.
All right, let's see. What's the worst Chris Davis? Oh my God, this is absurd. In 2018, Chris Davis, -2.6 wins above replacement.
That'll do it.
Yeah, it's not great. He had, because they were pot committed to him, all the money that they were paying him. So they played him 128 games when he had a 46 WRC plus, a 168, 243, 296 slash line. This is the worst season in recent memory.
It's gotta be. I mean, was that the year that he was like 0 for 59 in a row? There was one year where he had an 0 for 59 stretch, I remember. And it
has to be. I mean, he would have.
Orioles just kept trotting him out there.
His last year would have been worse, but they finally gave up on him. So the last year, he only played 16 games. In 16 games, he put up -0.8 wins above replacement with a -14 WRC plus. -14 WRC plus. He 115 batting average, 164 on base percentage. Just
a true get that bag all-star. I mean,
yeah,
he's up there with Chandler Parsons and anyone else you want to put in the conversation.
At least Parsons got hurt. Chris Davis just sucked.
True.
All right. A few games left here to hit on. Next one, Seattle Mariners, Oakland A's. George Kirby on the mound for Seattle, and I like Kirby. If you watch him pitch, the stuff really matches the eye test. He's one of the top pitching prospects in all of baseball. But one thing that is a little bit of an issue with him to this point, the results haven't quite been there. There's been some inconsistencies. He's allowed some hard contact. He's $7,000 over on FanDuel without really picking up any ownership. On DraftKings, we've got George Kirby at 6,000, project for 13% ownership. I like him as a contrarian cost-saving option, just betting on the arm talent. And I recently found out also that we went to the same college. That aside, that we both went to Elon University. George Kirby is just really outstanding stuff, one of the top pitching prospects in all of baseball. I think he's going to figure out at some point. I don't know if it's going to be today, but if there's going to be a spot where he figures it out, why not at home against the Oakland A's? The A's have a 3.2 implied run total. George Kirby is $6,000 on DraftKings and isn't popular. I think this makes sense to me as a salary-saving pitching option.
You can throw anybody against Oakland. It's not a problem. They're 9th in strikeout rate against right-handers, and they are dead last in WRC+. Yeah, why not, right? He's $6K. Let's go for it. Works for me.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we can't look too much at George Kirby's numbers this year. Like I said, it's only a handful of starts. He's one of the highest regarded pitching prospects in all of baseball. And you watch him pitch for like 5 pitches and it makes sense. Like, oh, this guy throws 100 miles per hour and he throws his breaking pitches like it's a wiffle ball. So it might take him a second to really acclimate to the big leagues, but these minor league numbers, this year in Double A, 1.82 ERA, the year before 2.77, the year before 2.38, the year before that 2.35. The strikeout numbers have always been around 30%. In Double A this year, actually a 34.4% K rate. And sure, you might be saying, well, those are minor league teams. All right, well, what are the Oakland A's? More or less a minor league team. So this is what George Kirby's used to. He's used to pitching against bad offenses in the minor leagues. And that's kind of what the Oakland A's are here. So I'm going to get to Kirby. I'm going to be overweight to the field on him. I'm going to bet on the arm talent. On the other side of the game.
A lot of respect from Vegas, right? He's getting a lot of respect from Vegas. 3.2 opponent implied team total. So that's tied with or it's just slightly behind Corbin Burns, and we're getting him at 6K. Yeah, I think Kirby's a very nice play today.
And then on the other side, this is another spot that I don't like either end of. James Caprillion isn't great, but isn't terrible. I don't think the Mariners offense is terrible. I think they're slightly above average, but I do think there's regression coming. They play in a very pitcher-friendly park. Another reason, by the way, to like George Kirby on the other side is that Seattle does play more favorably towards pitchers, but Caprillion 4.91 expected ERA, 21.1% K rate. There's so many offensive pitchers that we've gone over that we like already that I don't really have that much interest in either side. Could you sell me on Caprillion or the Mariners?
I would take the Mariners if I was going to pick a side there. Caprillion has been one of the few pitchers that has struggled with the home run ball this season, right? He's got a 15% homer per fly ball rate, 1.5 homers per 9 innings. Those are going to be pretty mediocre numbers on a year where the ball is just not traveling to start the season. He's pitched to a 4.50 ERA on a 2.13 BABIP. So like he seems like a really bad pitcher at this point. So I'm all for getting some Seattle exposure, considering how cheap they are. They shouldn't carry much ownership. So I think if you're going to play someone in that matchup, the Seattle bats make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I agree. If I had to take one side, it'd be Seattle. I have zero interest in Caprillion today. Ultimately, though, I still don't really think I'm going to end up getting to the Mariners. Moving on, we get Soccer
3,200. What a fall for that guy.
Yeah, sad.
This guy was once considered one of the most feared right-handed mashers in the game. And now he is facing just a very mediocre right-handed pitcher, and he's 3,200.
Hey, we just talked about Chris Davis. Remember how good he was before he got the big money contract extension. Like Chris Davis was an MVP candidate, and then he went to worst player ever in fairly short order. How much do you think?
I'm in on Jesse Winker today. That's what I'm saying. You call the Stolen Base the first DFS show in the history of baseball with a called Stolen Base. I'm calling a Jesse Winkerbomb.
Hey, remember the he had a 4 home run game not too long ago, didn't he? Or was it a 3 homer game a couple
Three,
years
I
ago?
believe. Yeah, it's been a bad year for him, but I'm showing a little bit of faith. He pulled the reverse Ken Griffey going from Cincinnati to Seattle. I really have no stats to back this up except for the fact that he's been really good against right-handers throughout his career.
Yeah, maybe it hurts him a little bit that he's moved to Seattle, which is more of a pitcher-friendly ballpark. But that aside, I think he's too talented to not end up. He was an all-star last year. He's going to be fine moving forward. We've got 2 games left to talk about. And right now, my favorite pitcher in all of baseball, Corbin Burnes, going up against the San Diego Padres. Burnes this year, 31.5% K rate, 3.1 expected ERA, 0.83 whip. I love Corbin Burnes. If you have the salary to pay up for him, it's not an issue for me. But this is a very rare time that I'm going to say this. Considering the amount of pitching options we have on the slate and the amount of ownership going to Corbin Burnes, I think there's other guys I'm ultimately going to like getting to a little bit more. His matchup on the road against the Padres isn't as favorable as some of the other matchups that we've seen from high-end pitchers. So I think I'd rather play Gausman at a third of the ownership. I'd rather take the salary savings on somebody like Sonny Gray. Zach Gallen we could get for a sixth of the ownership. So, I mean, there's different places to look to. I'm not going to be outright fading Corbin Burnes, but if I was making a single entry lineup right now, I think I'd just play other guys ahead of him. Once again, not a knock against Corbin Burnes. He's the betting favorite to win the NL Cy Young. I think that's more than justified. But I think there's other guys I'd rather get to for lower ownership. What are you going to be doing with Burnes?
That's exactly how I'm approaching him today. There are some days where it makes sense to load up on one pitcher, and there are other slates where it makes sense to spread the love a little bit. I think this is a spread the love slate. And if that means I'm a little underweight on Burnes and a little overweight on, Dylan Cease and guys of that ilk, that's a trade-off that I think I'm willing to make.
At the same time, too, I'm not stacking against Corbin Burnes. That's not something I would really ever advocate for, especially on a slate of this size. I'm a little confused with the ownership on Blake Snell on the other side of this game. And I get that he's cheap at 7,300, but the Brewers have a pretty potent offense, and Snell has not pitched very much this year. I'm looking up his pitch count right now. So Blake Snell in his last start, I did get up to 84 pitches. Yeah, his only start of the year, he did get up to 84 pitches. He also got his ass kicked against the Phillies. He was underwhelming last year. He was much better at home than he was on the road. So, I mean, it's 7,300. There's certainly reasons to consider Blake Snell, but I feel better about going to George Kirby for $1,300 cheaper as my SP2 while also getting half the ownership. So, Blake Snell, once again, if you have some of them in your player pool, cool, but I don't think I'm going to get to 25% of them. What are you going to be doing with Blake Snell?
Yeah, I'm with you. It's baffling, the projected ownership on him. Yes, he struck out a decent handful of batters in that last start. He does have solid strikeout upside. His velocity was up. He was over 96 miles an hour, average fastball velocity. But I can't imagine he's going to get more than 5 innings or so in his second start of the year. Milwaukee is sort of middle of the road matchup wise. Like for me, Sonny Gray, clear edge, George Kirby, clear edge. I'll be underweight on Blake Snell. There's a chance that I'll have no Blake Snell, to be honest.
Yeah. I don't think that I would have 0%, but I can't imagine I get to the 25% either. There's just a lot of pitchers to like on this slate. And actually, in fact, considering the ownership going to Blake Snell and how much he struggled last year at times, I don't mind stacking against him for leverage as a contrarian stack either. Let's see, where do we have the Brewers in terms of projected ownership? The Brewers are projected for 2% ownership as a team with 4% chance to be a top stack. And then you also consider Blake Snell. Snell had a 4.2 ERA, a 4.86 expected ERA last year. That's not terrible, but it's not great either. The Brewers have a good offense. Snell is the second most popular pitcher on DraftKings right now. Solely for leverage purposes, I don't mind stacking against them.
I think that's viable.
Yeah, so I think we're on the same page there. This one also, it's going to very much come down to ownership. So like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, check out Live Before Lock later on the day and all the rest of our content, because I'm not sure who's on the MLB show, but they'll have a better idea later on the day what some of the ownership is going to look like and who to get to. Let's see. One game left on the slate to talk about. It's your New York Mets that we're going to close out the day with. Logan Webb on the mound for San Francisco, Chris Bassett for the Mets. I like both of these pitchers. I used to not be high on Bassett. I've come around to him at this point. Logan Webb, the strikeouts haven't quite been there this year, but they're going to come. He's a really talented pitcher. So Bassett and Webb, once again, I think these are pitchers that are quality. I don't want to stack against them, but I don't think they're going to really make it into my pitcher pool either, just because there's so many pitchers we've talked about that we like already. Webb and Bassett are both fairly expensive, and the Mets and Giants both have good offenses. So I don't really see anything that's going to be a priority for me today. Do you see it differently?
I'm higher on Logan Webb than you. I don't know if I would call him a priority target, but this Mets offense, even though they just kind of exploded for a bunch of runs yesterday, I still think they're doing it mostly with smoke and mirrors. And this is someone who has watched the team, basically every game, but the numbers back that up too. They have one of the lower barrel rates in the league. Their hard hit rate, exit velocity are all pretty mediocre. They lead the league in infield hits. It's all stuff that kind of feels unsustainable. So when you tell me Logan Webb, who is a guy that entered the year as like a legitimate Cy Young candidate, and now he's down to 8,800 pitching in the most pitcher friendly ballpark in the league, that's a guy that I'm going to be interested in.
Yep. I could see that. There's just so many other pitchers we've talked about that he just ultimately, I don't think is going to make the cut for me. I've already mentioned that my player pool is ultimately going to probably be spread really thin on this slate. I'm trying to find ways to cut it off. And this is probably just going to be one of them for me. Doesn't mean I dislike Logan Webb, but the matchup against the Mets is fairly difficult. So that is just about going to do it for us. But one thing to shout out before we finish the show, that if you guys want access to all of the Awesemo Plus tools we have, you could sign up right now for the first time using the promo code MLB Strategy Show, and they'll get you 50% off your first month of Awesemo Plus Platinum. You get access to stuff like the top stacks tool, top pitchers tool, all the ownership projections, which is really, really important when you're building MLB DFS lineups. Other than that, once again, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Good luck today, guys. Hope to see you later.